sometimes in the transplant world, failing is actually passing, but passing is actually failing. How does that work?
Hit the subscribe button and click the bell notification to become part of the Transplant Helper community.
Hey folks, welcome to Transplant Helper again today. My name is Jim Merle, and I just want to back up in time for just a moment, talk to you about a time for me pre-transplant when I was actually being evaluated for transplant and at the time hoping to be listed. It really comes down to the fact that I had already been through 3 transplant evaluations. I was on the midst of my 4th, and I was down to the final test. And I'd already had echoes, EKGs, 30-day heart monitors, checks of my whole body, head to toe, that sort of thing. And the final thing they needed to get a hold to was to make a comparative study of a previous pulmonary function test. Now, pulmonary function test can take on all sorts of faces, look all different from one to another, but for me, the pulmonary function test was the bad guy, okay? It was the elephant in the room, the thing I didn't want to go through, where basically they were going to put me on a treadmill, put tubes and wires all over me, make me walk and or run as best I could, and see how my pulmonary function was in regards to actually taking in the oxygen, making use of it, versus how much carbon dioxide was coming out of my body. Okay, and I got on the treadmill that day. I don't know that I could call it running. I got up a little bit of speed, and before very long, maybe after 30, 45 seconds, I pretty much came off the treadmill. Game over. That was it. I was done. And I can remember that day being pretty upset because I knew ultimately I probably or more than likely had failed that test, and that wasn't going to be good. I was hoping to be a lot stronger, have a lot more stamina, a lot more energy, really just to do better. That's what I was really hoping for. But before I left the office that day, my coordinator, Connie, come to me. I love Connie. Connie comes up to me and she said, "Mr. Merle, I'm going to give you a call in the morning, let you know what the results of the pulmonary function test, and then we'll let you know what we're going to do from here as far as making a decision to list you. Probably, if that were the case, it might happen within the week." Okay, so I waited around, got the phone call the next morning. Connie called and she said, "Jim, I just want to let you know you actually failed the pulmonary function test." And I remember thinking to myself, wait a minute, failed it. I expected I did, but how bad was it? So I said, "Connie, how bad did I fail it? What were the numbers like?" She said, "Well, without going into the numbers, which really won't matter at this point, I can just tell you, Mr. Merle, you failed it miserably." And I remember thinking to myself again, I didn't want to fail. I wanted to do good. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to have this and that. But what I understood that day as I thought it through, and it took a few moments now for this to soak in, but what I understood that day as I thought it through is actually that when I failed, I passed. That is, when I failed that pulmonary function test that day, which was the pinnacle, the last of all the testing they needed to try to evaluate me for transplant, I was actually failing it in order to pass, in order to be a winner, and ultimately listed for transplant. And as you know, the rest of the story, ultimately I got the transplant, and here I am today. So there are going to be times in the transplant life when to fail is actually to pass. But what we need to understand that there's some days which are actually better days when we pass in order to fail, okay? And I hope and wished many times that I'd been more in that vein of things, being willing to pass in order to fail. That is, to pass the test, to be strong, to have, the strength, the stamina, the energy, and all that is needed to pass those tests so I could fail at getting on the transplant list. And I just bring this up because this is kind of one of those mixed bag of emotions things, one of those things where you never really know what to do. And I can admit, every time I went in from one of those 4 evaluations total, each of the tests within them, oftentimes struggled in my mind, wondering, would I be better off to going and give it my all, to do my best to try to pass the test and not be listed, or to do the back opposite of such? Well, I was always honest about it. I always gave it everything I had. But ultimately, it's an exciting time. I see people sometimes that are very disappointed. They say, I went in, I got evaluated. They said I'm not a candidate for transplant. Well, if that's because you're untransplantable, if that's a word, or that's because it's too dangerous to transplant you, that's a sad day. But if it's because you actually did good, if it's because you actually passed a test or a series of tests, and that caused you to fail at getting on the list, that is absolutely positive, okay? So what I'm really saying to you today is don't be disappointed in either state. Whether you fail or whether you pass a certain test or not, don't be disappointed in it, because that's either drawing you closer to transplant, well, ultimately, hopefully, you'll get that gift of life, that opportunity, or it's keeping you away from transplant, hopefully, which means that you're healthier than we once assumed, okay? So there's good and bad to everything. There's one side or the other, two sides of these coins. It's black and white. It's sometimes not easy to see, but it's evidently what we must see. So let me just say to each and every one of you, if you're out there and you're being evaluated for transplant or you're waiting for transplant, that whole wait time is hard, just know that whatever's to be with you and is the will of God, that's what will be with you, okay? And it's always the best just to kick back, try to take that deep breath in and out, and then let yourself relax and let time and let circumstance and all just take its course. Don't panic, don't worry, just let it take its course. And understand that sometimes failing is passing, but at the same time, passing can be failing, and both can be a good thing. Until I see you next time, each and every one of you, please stay stronger, friends.